The deafening sound of a siren cut through the morning silence, followed by a thunderous crash that made the entire house shake. Lila Martinez jumped out of bed like she'd been electrocuted, her heart pounding frantically in her chest. Through the window, she could see black smoke rising from the backyard. "What the heck?" she screamed, but her voice was muffled by another explosive sound. She ran downstairs in her pajamas with messy hair, only to find firefighters storming into her house through the front door. One of them, tall with broad shoulders, removed his helmet, revealing disheveled brown hair and green eyes she knew all too well. "Good morning, fiancé," said Ethan Carter with a provocative smile, still holding a fire hose. "Looks like our engagement party is going to be more heated than we expected." Lila froze, not because of the fire, not because of the firefighters in her living room, but because of the word Ethan had just used, fiancé. "I'm going to kill you," she yelled, lunging toward him, but was intercepted by a female firefighter holding a fire extinguisher. "Ma'am, please keep your distance. There was an explosion in your tati." The firefighter consulted a clipboard. "Fiancé chemistry lab." "He's not my—" Lila started, but Ethan interrupted, pulling a crumpled paper from his firefighter jacket pocket. "According to this document we found at the explosion site, we've been officially engaged for, let me see, 8 hours. Lila snatched the paper from his hands. It was an engagement certificate, completely official with seals and signatures. Their signatures. "This is impossible. I would never sign something like this. Especially with you." Ethan shrugged, running his hand through his hair. "Well, apparently last night you thought differently, along with a bottle of tequila and a very specific bet about who could create the most spectacular chemical reaction." Suddenly, memories started coming back in flashes. The university laboratory, the stupid competition between the two best chemistry students, the tequila someone brought to celebrate the end of exams, Ethan saying she'd never have the courage to bet something truly important, her saying she'd bet anything to prove she was better than him. "Oh my goodness," she murmured, reality hitting like a brick. "I bet an engagement, not just bet," Ethan said, now with an even more irritating smile. "You lost. My formula exploded much more impressively than yours. And now," he paused dramatically, "we're officially engaged for 6 months. According to the contract, you both signed in the presence of 3 witnesses." Lila looked around. Her house was full of firefighters. There was a smoking hole in the backyard, and she was discovering she had committed herself to the man she detested most in the world. Ethan Carter, the guy who always got better grades than her, who always knew the answers before her, who always managed to make professors laugh with his stupid jokes, who had that irritating, confident smile that made her want to throw something at his head. 6 months? She asked, her voice failing. 6 months, he confirmed. "And considering it was your crazy chemical experiment that caused this explosion, I'd say we're starting off on the wrong foot." Lila looked at the paper again. At the bottom, there was a clause in small print. "The couple must cohabitate and maintain public appearances of a genuine relationship throughout the entire engagement period." "Cohabitate?" she stammered. "Ah, that part," Ethan said, scratching his neck. "Well, considering my apartment kind of exploded, looks like I'll have to stay here." As if on cue, another firefighter approached. "Mr. Carter, we managed to control the fire, but the building will need to be condemned for at least 3 months for structural repairs." Lila felt the world spinning. Not only was she engaged to Ethan Carter, but he was also going to live in her house for the next few months. "This can't be happening," she muttered. Ethan approached, lowering his voice. "Look, Lila, I know we started off on the wrong foot." "Started off on the wrong foot?" she exploded. "You blew up my backyard, invaded my house with a fire truck, and now you're telling me we have to pretend we're a couple in love for 6 months. Technically," Ethan said, trying not to smile, "I didn't blow up your backyard. Your experimental formula exploded. I was just trying to put out the fire. You're a firefighter. Part-time job. I need to pay for college somehow." Lila ran her hands through her hair, trying to process the situation. "Let me understand. You're a chemistry student and a firefighter? And a paramedic in my spare time," Ethan added casually. "I mean, now that we're going to live together, it's good for you to know I have medical skills. You never know when you might need them." "I'm going to need a paramedic if you don't stop talking," Lila growled. At that moment, Lila's mother appeared at the front door, still in her robe with an expression of total panic. "Lila, what happened?" "I was coming back from your aunt's house when I saw the firefighters." And she stopped abruptly upon seeing Ethan, "Oh my goodness, you're handsome. Who are you?" "Mom, this is Ethan Carter. Leela swallowed hard. "Fiancé." Lila's mother fainted. Ethan quickly knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "She's fine. Just had a shock. I'll get my medical kit." "You have a medical kit?" Lila asked, impressed despite herself. "Always," Ethan replied, already running toward the fire truck. Rule number 1. Always be prepared. Lila looked at her unconscious mother, the smoking backyard, the firefighters in her living room, and Ethan running with a medical case. In less than an hour, her life had become complete chaos. And the worst part? A small part of her was curious to see what else could go wrong. Ethan came running back and knelt again beside Lila's mother, applying smelling salts with professional expertise. "She'll be fine," he said, looking at Lila with a surprisingly gentle expression. "And as for us, well, Lila, looks like we have 6 months to figure out if we can avoid killing each other." Lila looked into Ethan's green eyes and, for the first time, noticed there was something different in them, something she had never seen before at the university. Sincerity. 6 months, she repeated, this time not as a question, but as an acceptance of fate. 6 months, Ethan confirmed. "And who knows, maybe it won't be as bad as we think." Lila laughed, a somewhat hysterical sound. "Ethan Carter, you just blew up my backyard, invaded my house, and now you're going to live with me for the next 6 months. If that's not bad, I don't know what is." Ethan smiled, not that irritating smile from always, but something genuine and warm. "Well, at least it won't be boring." And as the firefighters finished cleaning up the debris and her mother slowly regained consciousness, Lila realized Ethan was right. The next 6 months definitely wouldn't be boring. 3 hours later, Lila's house looked like a disaster zone crossed with a medical facility. Her mother, Sophia Martinez, was sitting on the couch with an ice pack on her forehead, occasionally glancing at Ethan with a mixture of suspicion and admiration. The firefighters had finally left, but not before declaring the backyard structurally compromised and Ethan's apartment building uninhabitable for the foreseeable future. Lila stood in her kitchen, staring at the coffee maker like it held the secrets of the universe, when Ethan appeared beside her, carrying 2 large duffel bags and what appeared to be a portable chemistry set. "Please tell me you're not planning to conduct more experiments in my house," Lila said without looking at him. "This is just my mobile lab, you know, for emergencies." Ethan replied, setting the bags down, "And before you ask, yes, it's all perfectly safe. I learned my lesson about mixing volatile compounds with enthusiasm." "Enthusiasm? Is that what we're calling tequila-fueled stupidity now?" Ethan had the decency to look sheepish. "About that, I may have some gaps in my memory, too. But I do remember you challenging me to a battle of the brains and insisting that whoever lost had to do whatever the winner wanted." Lila finally turned to face him. "And you thought, get engaged, was a reasonable request?" "Actually," Ethan scratched his head, "I think that was your suggestion. I was going to ask you to do my organic chemistry homework for a week." Lila's jaw dropped. "I suggested we get engaged? According to Dr. Lee, you stood on the lab table, pointed at me dramatically, and declared that you'd rather marry your worst enemy than admit I was better at chemistry than you." The coffee mug in Lila's hand suddenly felt very heavy. "No, no way. I would never." And then, Ethan continued, clearly enjoying her mortification, "You said," and I quote from the witness statements, "Fine. If you're so confident, let's make it official. 6 months. Winner takes all." Lila sat down heavily on a kitchen stool. "I'm going to die of embarrassment." "Hey," Ethan's voice softened. "If it makes you feel better," I apparently responded by saying, "Challenge accepted," and doing some kind of victory dance that Nathan described as aggressively dorky. Despite herself, Lila snorted with laughter. "You did a victory dance? A very enthusiastic one, according to Chloe. She has video evidence." "Oh no, there's video? 3 different angles. Dr. Lee is apparently considering using it for her responsible laboratory conduct presentation next semester." Lila buried her face in her hands. "This just keeps getting worse. Look on the bright side," Ethan said, hopping onto the stool next to her. "At least we'll be famous." "That's not the bright side, Ethan. That's the 7th circle of academic humiliation." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, we could just call this whole thing off. Find a way to break the contract." Lila looked up at him, surprised. "Really? You do that?" "Of course. I mean, I'm not exactly thrilled about the situation either. No offense. None taken, but Lila pulled out the contract and read through it again. According to this, whoever breaks the engagement has to pay for all the damage caused by our experiments. And looking at her backyard, she gestured toward the window where a crater-like hole still smoldered slightly. How much damage are we talking about? Ethan asked nervously. Lila pulled out her phone and started calculating. Well, there's the structural damage to the deck, the garden, the fence, your apartment building. She paused, her face growing pale. Ethan, we're looking at about $60,000 in damages. Ethan whistled low. $60,000? I don't have $60,000. Do you have $60,000? I work part-time at the campus bookstore. I barely have $60. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation settling in. So, Ethan said finally, I guess we're roommates for 6 months. I guess we are, Lila sighed. But if we're doing this, we need rules. Lots of rules. Rules, right? That makes sense. Ethan pulled out his phone. Should I take notes? Rule number 1, Lila began, pacing around the kitchen. No more chemistry experiments in this house. Period. What about homework? I still need to pass my classes. Homework is fine, but no mixing, no heating, no combining anything that could possibly explode. Fair enough. Rule number 2. Lila thought for a moment. Separate bedrooms. Obviously. Obviously, Ethan agreed. I can take the couch. There's a spare room upstairs. It's small, but it has a bed. Perfect. Rule number 3. We split all household expenses. Groceries, utilities, everything. Deal. Rule number 4. We need a cover story for how this happened that doesn't involve us being drunk and stupid. Lila stopped pacing. Right? People are going to ask questions. What if we say it was a whirlwind romance? We've been secretly dating and decided to take the next step. No one would believe that. We've been arguing in public for 2 years. Good point. What about we had a moment of clarity during a study session and realized our arguments were actually chemistry? Lila raised an eyebrow. Chemistry? Not the subject. The, romantic kind. Ethan, we literally cannot stand each other, can't we? I mean, sure. You're stubborn, competitive, and you have this annoying habit of being right about everything. But what? Ethan paused, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. But you're also brilliant, passionate about your work, and you make me want to be better at everything I do, even if it's just to prove you wrong. Lila felt something flutter in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth that she quickly pushed down. That's not chemistry, Ethan. That's rivalry. Is it? Ethan asked quietly. Before Lila could answer, her mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. Lila, I've been thinking about this whole situation, Sophia said, looking much more composed than earlier, and I have some concerns. Mom, we can explain. No need to explain. Young people do foolish things when they're in love. But if you're going to be living together, we need to discuss expectations. Lila and Ethan exchanged glances. Expectations? Lila asked weakly. First, I want to meet his family. If my daughter is engaged to this boy, I need to know what kind of people raised him. Oh, that's not really necessary, Ethan started. Second, Sophia continued, there will be a proper engagement party. The whole family needs to meet you, Ethan. My sisters, my cousins, everyone. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. Mom, that's really not. Third, I want to see some romance. Real romance. If you two are truly in love, you should act like it. Ethan cleared his throat. Mrs. Martinez, with all due respect, Lila and I are still figuring things out. We don't want to rush. Nonsense. You rushed into an engagement, didn't you? Now you need to convince me this isn't some elaborate joke. Lila looked at Ethan helplessly. He gave her a look that clearly said, You handle this? Mom, Lila said carefully. Ethan and I, we have a very unique relationship. Unique how? We're, Lila searched for words, intellectually passionate about each other. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Some couples share hobbies. We share a love of proving each other wrong. Sophia looked between them suspiciously. And this works for you? It's very stimulating, Lila said, immediately regretting her word choice. Show me. Sophia said suddenly. Show you what? Ethan asked. Show me this intellectual passion. Prove to me you're really in love. Lila and Ethan stared at each other in panic. Right now? Lila squeaked. Right now. Ethan took a deep breath, then suddenly grabbed Lila's hands. Lila Martinez, he said in an overly dramatic voice. Your understanding of molecular bonding makes my heart race faster than a spontaneous combustion reaction. Lila blinked at him, then decided to play along. Ethan Carter, when you explain thermodynamics, you make me feel like I'm experiencing an endothermic reaction. You absorb all the energy in the room. Your intelligence is more explosive than any compound I've ever created. Your smile has a longer half-life than uranium. 2, 3, 8. Sophia watched this exchange with growing amusement. Okay, I believe you. You're both completely insane. But I believe you're perfect for each other. After Sophia left, Lila and Ethan collapsed against the kitchen counter, laughing. Longer half-life than uranium-238? Ethan gasped between laughs. Hey, you started it with the spontaneous combustion, Lila replied, wiping tears from her eyes. Your mom is terrifying, by the way. She likes you. If she didn't, you'd know it. Ethan smiled. Well, that's something, I guess. They stood there for a moment, the laughter fading into something more comfortable than Lila had expected. So, Ethan said finally, rule number 5. We have to be convincing when people are watching. Rule number 5, Lila agreed. But only when people are watching, only when people are watching. Ethan confirmed, as Ethan headed upstairs with his bags. Lila couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the next 6 months wouldn't be completely terrible. She was probably wrong. Day 3 of living with Ethan Carter, and Lila had already learned several disturbing facts about her fiancé. 1. He sang in the shower loudly, and it was actually good, which was somehow more annoying than if he'd been terrible. 2. He made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, which she secretly loved but would never admit. 3. He left chemistry journals scattered everywhere, but they were always open to articles she found fascinating. 4. He had an entire drawer dedicated to emergency medical supplies, which was oddly comforting. 5. He looked ridiculously good in the morning, even with messy hair and wearing a faded t-shirt that read, I have chemistry jokes. But I don't think they'd get a reaction. Lila was contemplating this last point while watching Ethan scramble eggs in her kitchen when her phone rang. Lila, came the excited voice of her best friend and study partner, Zoe Alvarez. I just heard the most incredible rumor about you and Ethan Carter. Please tell me it's not true. Lila looked at Ethan, who had obviously heard Zoe's voice through the phone. He raised an eyebrow and mouthed, First test. Hey, Zoe, Lila said carefully. What rumor? That you two are engaged? It's all over campus. Someone posted a picture of firefighters at your house with Ethan in full gear, and now everyone's saying you guys have been secretly dating, and he rescued you from a fire like some kind of romantic hero. Lila nearly choked on her coffee. Someone posted what? Ethan abandoned the eggs and came over to look at her phone as she switched to speaker. Check your Instagram. The fire department posted it on their page with the caption, Love is in the air, and sometimes it's smoky. It's already got like 2,000 likes. Lila frantically opened Instagram. There it was, a perfectly timed photo of Ethan kneeling beside her unconscious mother, his firefighter jacket open, hair disheveled, looking like a movie star. Lila was visible in the background, still in her pajamas, but somehow the photographer had caught her looking at Ethan with what appeared to be adoration rather than homicidal rage. Oh no, Lila whispered. Oh no is right, Zoe continued. Lila, why didn't you tell me you were dating Ethan Carter? I thought you two hated each other. Ethan leaned closer to the phone. Hey, Zoe, it's Ethan. We wanted to keep it private until we figured things out. Ethan, you're there at Lila's house in the morning? Lila could practically hear Zoe connecting the dots. It's not what you think, Lila started. Oh my gosh, it's exactly what I think. You two are living together. Lila Elena Martinez, you have been holding out on me. Zoe, calm down. Calm down? My best friend is engaged to the hottest guy in the chemistry department, and she didn't tell me. I'm never calming down. I'm coming over right now. The line went dead. Lila stared at her phone in horror. She's coming over. How long do we have? Ethan asked. Zoe lives 2 blocks away, and she drives like she's in a Fast and Furious movie. Maybe 10 minutes. Ethan nodded grimly. Okay. A crash course in being a couple. What do I need to know about you that a boyfriend would know? What? I don't know. This is insane. Lila. Focus. She's your best friend. She'll know if we're faking it. Lila started pacing. Okay. I hate mushrooms. I'm allergic to shellfish. I always drink my coffee with exactly 2 sugars. And I have a weird fear of butterflies. Butterflies? Really? They're unpredictable. You never know which direction they're going to fly. Ethan grinned. That's actually kind of adorable. It's not adorable. It's a legitimate phobia. What about you? I'm lactose intolerant, but I eat ice cream anyway because I have no self-control. I can't sleep without white noise. I've been afraid of clowns since I was 5. And I have a scar on my left shoulder from when I tried to rescue a cat from a tree and fell. You tried to rescue a cat? I was 12 and very heroic. The cat was fine. I broke my collarbone. Despite her panic, Lila found herself smiling. Of course you did. They heard a car screeching to a halt outside. She's here, Lila said, her voice going up an octave. Remember, Ethan said, suddenly taking her hands. We're in love. Completely, ridiculously in love. Right, in love. I can do that, Lila. Yeah, you might want to fix your hair. It's doing that thing where it sticks up when you're nervous. Lila automatically reached up to smooth her hair, realizing too late that Ethan, knowing this detail about her, actually made their story more believable. The front door burst open. Lila, where are you? I need details. Zoe Alvarez stormed into the kitchen like a tiny hurricane. She was barely 5 feet tall, but she had the presence of someone much larger. With bright purple hair and enough energy to power a small city, she stopped dead when she saw Lila and Ethan standing close together, Ethan's hand still holding Lila's. Oh, Zoe said, her voice suddenly soft. Oh, this is real. Zoe, Lila started. You're actually holding hands. You never hold hands with guys. You once told me that hand-holding was an inefficient use of manual dexterity. Ethan squeezed Lila's hands gently. I've been working on changing her mind about that. Zoe's eyes narrowed. Okay, I need to hear this story from the beginning. And I want details. How did this happen? When did this happen? Why are you wearing his t-shirt, Lila? Lila looked down and realized she was indeed wearing Ethan's chemistry jokes t-shirt, which she'd apparently grabbed instead of her own when she'd gotten dressed hastily that morning. We, Lila stammered. Ethan stepped in smoothly. Lila spilled coffee on her shirt this morning. I offered her one of mine, and you just gave her your shirt to wear? Why wouldn't I? She's my fiancée. Zoe's jaw dropped. Fiancé. The rumors said engaged, but I thought that was an exaggeration. Lila felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers, a silent reminder to stick to their story. It happened fast, Lila said. We've been secretly seeing each other for a few months. Months? Lila, how did you keep this from me for months? Well, Ethan said, our relationship started as study sessions. Academic collaboration turned into something more. Academic collaboration. Zoe looked skeptical. You two argue about everything. Passionate debates can be very stimulating, Lila said, remembering her mother's reaction to that word. Zoe studied them both carefully. Prove it. Prove what? Ethan asked. Prove you're really together. Kiss her. Lila felt her face go bright red. Zoe, that's not. If you're really engaged, you should be able to kiss your fiancé without looking like you're about to faint. Lila looked at Ethan helplessly. They hadn't discussed this scenario. Ethan stepped closer to her, his green eyes searching her face. Is this okay? He asked quietly. The fact that he asked that he was giving her a choice, even in this impossible situation, made something flutter in Lila's chest. Yeah, she whispered. It's okay. Ethan cupped her face gently with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Just follow my lead, he murmured so quietly only she could hear. And then he kissed her. It was supposed to be for show. It was supposed to be convincing but meaningless. It was supposed to be just another part of their performance. It was none of those things. Ethan's lips were soft and warm, and he kissed her like he meant it, like he'd been thinking about it for longer than 3 days. Lila found herself kissing him back, her free hand somehow ending up on his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as hers. When they broke apart, Lila's mind was completely blank. Wow, Zoe said softly. Okay, I'm convinced. Lila and Ethan stared at each other, both looking slightly dazed. That was. Lila started. Yeah, Ethan agreed. Zoe clapped her hands together. Okay, now I need the whole story. How did this happen? Start from the beginning. For the next hour, Lila and Ethan spun an elaborate tale of secret study dates, gradual realization of their feelings, and a romantic proposal in the chemistry lab. Zoe hung on every word, occasionally demanding more details that they had to invent on the spot. And the explosion? Zoe asked. Ethan was demonstrating something romantic with chemical reactions. Lila said, it got a little out of hand. I wanted to spell out I love you with controlled combustion reactions, Ethan added. Turns out that's harder than it sounds. That's the most Ethan Carter thing I've ever heard. Zoe laughed. Romantic and slightly dangerous. After Zoe finally left, promising to help plan an engagement party, Lila and Ethan collapsed on the couch. "Well," Ethan said, "that went better than expected, did it? Because I feel like we just told about 15 lies and I can't remember half of them. We'll figure it out. The important thing is, Zoe believed us." Lila nodded, then realized she was still wearing Ethan's t-shirt. "I should probably change." "You don't have to. It looks good on you." Lila felt that flutter again, the one that had started during their kiss. "Ethan." "Yeah, that kiss. That was just for show, right?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Right," he said finally, "just for show." But as Lila headed upstairs to change, she caught Ethan touching his lips thoughtfully, like he was trying to figure something out. And for the first time since this whole mess started, Lila wondered if maybe their fake relationship wasn't going to be the hardest part of the next 6 months. Maybe the hardest part was going to be remembering it was fake. 1 week into their engagement charade, Lila discovered that living with Ethan Carter was like conducting a chemistry experiment where she couldn't predict the results. Just when she thought she had him figured out, he'd do something that completely threw off her calculations. Like the morning she found him in the kitchen at 6 a.m., wearing safety goggles and carefully measuring ingredients for what turned out to be the most perfect pancakes she'd ever tasted. Or the evening she came home from her shift at the bookstore to find him studying on the couch, unconsciously humming while he worked, and she'd stood in the doorway for 5 minutes just listening because his voice was unexpectedly soothing. Or the way he'd started leaving little chemistry-themed jokes written on sticky notes around the house. "Are you made of copper and tellurium? Because you're cute." It was dorky and ridiculous, and Lila absolutely did not smile every time she found one. Absolutely not. But the most unsettling thing was how easily they'd fallen into a routine. Ethan made coffee in the mornings because he was an early riser. Lila cooked dinner because she actually enjoyed it. And Ethan's culinary skills ended at scrambled eggs and sandwiches. They did homework at the kitchen table together, occasionally helping each other with difficult concepts, their arguments about methodology feeling less like battles and more like intellectual exercises. It was almost comfortable, which was exactly why Lila was now standing in front of her closet, having a complete breakdown about what to wear to meet Ethan's family. "It's just dinner," she muttered to herself, pulling out a dress and immediately putting it back. "A casual family dinner where I have to convince his parents that I'm madly in love with their son, and definitely not someone who got drunk and made a terrible bet." Ethan appeared in her doorway, looking annoyingly calm in dark jeans and a button-down shirt that made his eyes look even greener. "You know you're talking to yourself, right?" "I'm processing," Lila replied, now holding up 2 different tops. "Blue or white?" "Blue. It brings out your eyes." Lila froze, a hanger in each hand. "My eyes are brown, dark brown with gold flecks," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "The blue makes the gold more noticeable." She stared at him. "How do you know about the gold flecks in my eyes?" Ethan's ears turned slightly red. "I'm very observant. It's a scientist thing." "Right, science." Lila put the white shirt back and pulled the blue one off its hanger. "Are you nervous about this?" "Terrified," Ethan admitted. "My family is a lot. My mom is going to ask you approximately 47 personal questions. My dad is going to want to show you his model train collection. And my sister Ava is going to try to embarrass me with childhood stories." "How old is Ava?" 23, but she acts like she's 12 when it comes to tormenting me. She's a medical student at Northwestern, which means she's both brilliant and insufferable." Lila pulled on the blue top and checked herself in the mirror. "Well, that explains where you get it from." "Hey," Ethan protested, but he was smiling. "I'm not insufferable. You once corrected our professor's equation in front of the entire lecture hall. The equation was wrong. You could have been more diplomatic about it," says the woman who told Professor Jenkins that his understanding of organic synthesis was charmingly outdated. Lila grinned. "Okay, fair point. We're both insufferable." Ethan stepped into her room and straightened her collar, his fingers brushing against her neck. "There. Perfect." The simple touch sent an unexpected shiver down Lila's spine. These casual moments of intimacy were becoming more frequent, and she wasn't sure if it was because they were getting better at playing their roles, or because the line between pretending and reality was getting increasingly blurred. "Ethan," she said as they headed downstairs, "what did you tell your family about how we got together?" "The truth. Mostly. We've been academic rivals. We were both working late in the lab. Things got heated during a debate about chemical bonding, and suddenly we realized our arguments were just another form of chemistry. That's actually not bad. I have my moments." Ethan grabbed his keys from the counter. "Oh," And I may have mentioned that you're the smartest person I've ever met, and that arguing with you is my favorite thing to do. Lila stopped walking. You said that. It's true, isn't it? You challenge me in ways no one else does. Even when you're driving me crazy, you're making me think harder. Before Lila could figure out how to respond to that, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Have fun tonight, Lila. Remember to ask about his family's medical history and whether they have any genetic predispositions to baldness. My mom wants to know if your family has a history of baldness, Lila said, showing Ethan the text. Ethan ran a hand through his thick hair. Full head of hair runs in the Carter family. My grandfather had better hair at 70 than most people do at 30. Good. Mom will be pleased. The drive to Ethan's family home took about 20 minutes, during which Ethan provided Lila with a comprehensive briefing on his relatives. His parents, Michael and Linda Carter, had been married for 28 years. His father was a retired engineer who now spent his time building elaborate model train sets in the basement. His mother was a high school English teacher who had strong opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. The key to surviving dinner with my mom, Ethan explained as they pulled into the driveway of a charming 2-story house with a perfectly manicured lawn, is to ask her about her book club. She's currently obsessed with this romance novel series about vampires who solve mysteries. Vampires who solve mysteries? Don't ask me to explain it. Just nod and look interested. The front door opened before they could even knock, revealing a woman who was clearly Ethan's mother. She had the same green eyes and the same smile, though hers was currently much wider than Ethan's ever got. You must be Lila. Linda Carter pulled Lila into an enthusiastic hug before she could respond. I'm so excited to finally meet the woman who stole my son's heart. Come in. Come in. Michael, they're here. Lila shot Ethan a look that clearly said, You didn't mention your mother was a hugger, but he just shrugged apologetically. The interior of the Carter house was warm and lived in, with family photos covering every available surface and the distinct smell of something delicious cooking. A tall man, who was obviously an older version of Ethan, emerged from what Lila assumed was the kitchen, wearing an apron that read, World's Greatest Dad, and a welcoming smile. So, this is the famous Lila, Michael Carter said, extending his hand. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about you since he called to tell us about the engagement. Dad, Ethan warned. What? I'm just saying, in 25 years, I've never heard you talk about anyone the way you talk about Lila. Lila felt her cheeks warm. It's wonderful to meet you both. Ethan has told me so much about you. All good things, I hope, Linda said, leading them into the living room. Ava's in the kitchen pretending to help but actually just eating all the appetizers. Ava, come meet your future sister-in-law. A young woman who looked like a female version of Ethan appeared in the doorway, wearing scrubs and an expression of barely contained glee. Oh my goodness, Ava said, looking between Lila and Ethan. You two are actually cute together. I was expecting this to be some kind of elaborate joke. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Ava, Ethan said dryly. Hey, you can't blame me for being skeptical. The last girl you brought home was that chemistry major who spent the entire dinner explaining why our table salt was technically poison. That was one time. And Rachel had some very strong opinions about sodium chloride. Rachel was intense, Michael agreed. Lila seems much more approachable. Lila wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not. Dinner was a lively affair. Linda had prepared enough food to feed a small army, and the conversation flowed easily from topic to topic. Lila found herself genuinely enjoying the evening, especially when Michael started showing her pictures of his model train collection on his phone, and Linda began enthusiastically describing the plot of her latest vampire mystery novel. So, the vampire detective realizes that the murder victim was actually turned into a vampire centuries ago. But someone used a special stake made from blessed silver to make it look like a regular murder. Linda explained over dessert. That's actually quite clever, Lila said. The blessed silver would disguise the supernatural elements of the crime. Linda Biamed. Exactly. See, Ethan. I told you she was smart, Mom. You've been telling me Lila was smart for approximately 2 hours. I got the message. It's just so nice to see you with someone who can keep up with you intellectually, Linda continued. Your father and I were starting to worry you'd end up with someone who didn't appreciate your beautiful brain. Mom, Ethan said, his ears reddening again. What? It's true. You've always been attracted to intelligent women. Remember in high school when you had that crush on the valedictorian? We are not talking about high school crushes at dinner, Ethan said firmly. Ava grinned wickedly. Oh, are we sharing embarrassing Ethan stories? Because I have so many. Ava, No, like the time he tried to impress a girl by building a volcano for the science fair, but he miscalculated the chemical reaction, and it exploded all over the gymnasium. Lila looked at Ethan with new interest. You've been causing chemistry-related explosions for years? It's apparently a recurring theme in my life, Ethan admitted. Or the time he got detention for correcting the chemistry teacher's lesson plan, and then spent the entire detention writing an improved curriculum. That lesson plan was fundamentally flawed, Ethan protested. See, Ava turned to Lila. He's been insufferable about chemistry since he was 15. I prefer passionate, Ethan said. You would? As the evening continued, Lila found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. The Carter family was warm and welcoming, and they clearly adored Ethan. But more than that, she was seeing a different side of him. The way he helped his mother clear the table without being asked, the way he listened patiently to his father's detailed explanation of a particularly complex train track layout, the way he tolerated Ava's teasing with good humor. After dinner, Linda insisted on showing Lila Ethan's childhood bedroom, which had been preserved exactly as he'd left it when he went to college. He was such a serious little boy, Linda said, pointing to a bookshelf filled with science textbooks and chemistry sets, always asking questions, always experimenting with something. I used to find him in the backyard mixing different combinations of dirt and water to see what would happen. Lila examined a photo on Ethan's desk of him at maybe 10 years old, wearing safety goggles and holding up a blue ribbon from a science fair. He looked so proud, she said. He was. That was the first time he won first place in anything. He'd been entering science fairs for years but never quite managed to beat the older kids. That year, he finally figured out how to make his project stand out. What was it? He created a working model of the water cycle, but he added food coloring to demonstrate different types of precipitation. It wasn't the most complex project, but it was beautiful and educational. Linda paused, looking at the photo with obvious affection. I think that's when he knew he wanted to be a scientist. Lila felt something tighten in her chest as she looked at the photo. There was something achingly sweet about 10-year-old Ethan, so serious and determined, proudly displaying his first real scientific achievement. Mrs. Carter, Lila said, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. And please call me Linda. What was Ethan like growing up? Really like? Linda sat on the edge of Ethan's childhood bed, patting the space beside her for Lila to join her. He was the kind of child who never stopped asking why, Linda said. Why is the sky blue? Why do plants grow toward light? Why do some chemicals explode when you mix them? Michael and I spent hours at the library helping him find answers to his questions. That sounds exhausting. It was wonderful, Linda said with a smile. Challenging, but wonderful. Ethan has always had this incredible curiosity about the world. He wants to understand everything, to figure out how things work. Sometimes I think that's why he became a firefighter and paramedic, on top of studying chemistry. What do you mean? He wants to help people, but he also wants to understand the science behind helping people. He's not satisfied with just knowing that CPR works. He wants to understand the cardiovascular and respiratory systems that make CPR effective. Lila thought about this. She'd always seen Ethan's multiple jobs as showing off, but maybe it was something deeper than that. He's lucky to have parents who encouraged his curiosity, Lila said. We're lucky to have him, Linda replied. And Lila, I can see why he fell for you. You can? You asked the same kinds of questions he does at dinner. You didn't just accept what we told you about Michael's trains or my books. You wanted to understand the mechanics of how the tracks work and the psychological appeal of vampire mysteries. You think like he thinks. Lila felt a flush of warmth at the compliment, but also a pang of guilt. If only Linda knew that their entire relationship was built on a drunken bet and financial necessity. When they rejoined the family downstairs, Michael was in the middle of showing Ethan something on his laptop. Lila, come look at this, Ethan called. Dad's been tracking the migration patterns of monarch butterflies. Lila's step faltered. Butterflies? Monarch butterflies? Michael said enthusiastically. They have the most fascinating migration route. Did you know they travel up to 3,000 miles? That's very interesting, Lila said, staying carefully near the doorway. Ethan noticed her hesitation immediately. Actually, Dad, Lila's not really a big fan of butterflies. Oh, are you allergic? Michael asked, concerned. Not allergic, Lila said, feeling embarrassed. Just not a fan. She has a phobia, Ethan explained gently, which is completely understandable. Butterflies are very unpredictable. The fact that Ethan remembered this detail and didn't make her feel foolish about it made something warm unfurl in Lila's chest. Well, that's perfectly fine, Michael said, closing the laptop. "We all have things that make us uncomfortable. Ava's terrified of spiders. Spiders are legitimately scary," Ava protested. "They have too many legs, and they move too fast." "See?" Ethan said to Lila. "Everyone has something." As the evening wound down, Linda packed up enough leftovers to feed Lila and Ethan for a week, and the entire family gathered on the front porch to say goodbye. "You have to bring her back soon," Linda told Ethan while hugging Lila goodbye. "I want to hear all about her family, and I need someone to discuss vampire mysteries with." "I promise," Ethan said, "though I can't guarantee she'll share your enthusiasm for supernatural detective fiction." "Hey, don't knock it until you've tried it," Lila said. "I'm actually curious about the blessed silver steak concept." Linda's face lit up. "Oh, I have the whole series. I'll lend you the first book." In the car on the way home, Lila and Ethan drove in comfortable silence for several minutes before Lila spoke. "Your family is really wonderful. They like you." "How can you tell?" "My mom gave you leftovers and offered to lend you books. That's how you know you're in the inner circle." Lila smiled. "Your dad's train collection is actually fascinating. The engineering involved in creating those landscapes is incredible. He'll be thrilled to hear you say that. He's been trying to get someone to appreciate his hobby for years. And Ava's not as bad as you made her sound. She's just a typical little sister. Don't let her fool you. She's planning something. I could see it in her eyes." They pulled into Lila's driveway, and as they walked to the front door, Lila realized she felt lighter than she had in days. The evening had been genuinely enjoyable, not just endurable. "Ethan," she said as he unlocked the door, "thank you for remembering about the butterflies and for not making me feel stupid about it." Ethan paused, his hand still on the doorknob. "Lila, you're one of the smartest people I know. Having a phobia doesn't change that. Besides," he smiled, "I think it's kind of endearing that someone who can fearlessly handle volatile chemicals is afraid of butterflies. It's not endearing, it's irrational. Most fears are irrational. That doesn't make them less real." Inside the house, they settled into their usual evening routine. Ethan made tea while Lila changed into comfortable clothes. They ended up on the couch with their respective textbooks, Lila's head somehow ending up on Ethan's shoulder as she read. It wasn't until Ethan's breathing had evened out and she realized he'd fallen asleep that Lila allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been trying to ignore all evening. She was developing feelings for her fake fiancé. Real feelings. The kind that made her want to stay curled up against his side, listening to his heartbeat and breathing in the scent of his cologne. The kind that made her notice the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks when he slept, and the way his hand had unconsciously come to rest on her hair. This was bad. This was very, very bad. But as Ethan shifted slightly in his sleep, his arm tightening around her, Lila decided that maybe, just maybe, she could worry about how bad it was tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to stay here, pretending that this was real, and that the man whose shoulder she was using as a pillow actually was her fiancé. Even if it was all just an elaborate chemistry experiment with unpredictable results, 3 weeks into their unconventional living arrangement, Lila had developed what she privately called the Ethan Carter problem. The problem wasn't that he was difficult to live with, quite the opposite. The problem was that he was perfect to live with, and Lila was falling for him so hard that she was starting to forget their entire relationship was built on a foundation of tequila and poor decision-making. The problem had many symptoms, like the way her heart did a little flip every morning when she came downstairs to find Ethan already making coffee, his hair still messy from sleep, humming quietly while he worked, or how she'd started looking forward to their evening study sessions, not because she needed help with her coursework, but because she loved the way Ethan's face lit up when he explained a particularly complex concept. But the most dangerous symptom was the way she'd begun imagining a future beyond their 6-month contract, a future where Ethan didn't sleep in the spare room, a future where their morning coffee routine wasn't just convenience but choice, a future where the chemistry between them was acknowledged and explored rather than carefully ignored. Lila was contemplating this very problem while watching Ethan attempt to fix her garbage disposal on a Saturday morning. He was lying on his back under the sink, a toolbox beside him, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had ridden up slightly to reveal a strip of tanned skin that Lila was definitely not staring at. "Hand me the Phillips head screwdriver," Ethan's voice echoed from under the sink. Lila rummaged through the toolbox. "The what now?" "The screwdriver with the cross-shaped tip. They have different shapes." Ethan's head appeared from under the sink, his hair dusty and his expression amused. "Lila Martinez, genius chemistry student, doesn't know the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. I know chemistry, not home repair, Lila protested, holding up a screwdriver that looked vaguely cross-shaped. That's the one. Ethan's fingers brushed hers as he took the tool, and Lila felt that familiar electric sensation that had nothing to do with static electricity and everything to do with the way Ethan looked at her, like she was the most interesting thing in the room. Where did you learn to do all this? Lila asked, settling on the kitchen floor beside him. The home repair, the cooking, the medical stuff. Growing up, I was the kind of kid who took everything apart to see how it worked, Ethan explained, sliding back under the sink. My parents got tired of having to call repair people every time I investigated an appliance, so my dad taught me how to put things back together. And the paramedic training, that started in high school, I volunteered with the local fire department and realized I wanted to help people, but I also wanted to understand the science behind helping people. His voice was slightly muffled by the pipes. Chemistry makes sense to me. It's all about understanding how different elements interact. Paramedic work is just chemistry applied to human biology. Lila found herself smiling at the passion in his voice. You really love it, don't you? All of it? Yeah, I do. Ethan slid out from under the sink, sitting up to look at her. What about you? What got you into chemistry? Lila leaned back against the kitchen cabinets, surprised by the question. Most people assumed she'd chosen chemistry because she was good at it, which was true, but not the whole story. My dad, she said after a moment. He was a chemistry teacher before he died. I was 8, and he used to do these amazing experiments in our kitchen, nothing dangerous, she added quickly. Just simple things like making invisible ink with lemon juice, or creating rainbow reactions with food coloring and different density liquids. Ethan had gone very still, listening intently. He always said chemistry was like magic, but better. Because you could understand the magic. You could predict it, control it, use it to make beautiful things, or solve problems. Lila smiled at the memory. After he died, I found all his old chemistry textbooks in the garage. I started reading them because I missed him, and I guess I just never stopped. That's beautiful, Ethan said softly. It's also why I'm so competitive about it, Lila admitted. Chemistry isn't just my major, it's my connection to him. When someone knows more than me or does better than me, it feels like I'm failing him somehow. Ethan reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past few weeks, but still sent warmth shooting up Lila's arm. Lila, your dad would be incredibly proud of you. You're not just good at chemistry, you're passionate about it in a way that's infectious. You make other people love it too. I make you want to prove me wrong, Lila corrected. Same thing, Ethan grinned. Some of my best learning has come from trying to keep up with you. Before Lila could figure out how to respond to that confession, her phone rang. Zoe's name flashed on the screen, and Lila answered without thinking. Lila, perfect timing. Zoe's voice was bright with excitement. I just ran into Dr. Lee at the coffee shop, and she told me the most interesting thing about your engagement story. Lila's stomach dropped. Oh? She said you and Ethan got engaged after some kind of chemistry competition. That sounds so romantic. Why didn't you tell me the real story? Lila looked at Ethan, who had gone pale. They'd been so focused on convincing their families and friends that they'd forgotten about the actual witnesses to their drunken bet. We, Lila stammered. Actually, Ethan said, sliding closer to Lila and speaking loud enough for Zoe to hear through the phone, that's not exactly what happened. It's not? Zoe's voice was curious now. Dr. Lee witnessed the aftermath. Ethan continued smoothly. Lila and I had been working late in the lab, and things got heated. Not the chemistry. Us. We'd been dancing around our feelings for weeks. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I kissed her right there in the middle of the lab. Lila stared at Ethan, impressed despite herself by his quick thinking. And then? Zoe prompted. And then Lila said she'd been waiting for me to do that for months. Ethan continued, his eyes meeting Lila's with an intensity that made her forget they were lying. One thing led to another, and I ended up proposing with a ring made from lab equipment. A ring made from lab equipment? Copper wire twisted into a band, Lila said, finally finding her voice. It was very romantic. That's the most adorable thing I've ever heard, Zoe squealed. Lila, you have to show me pictures. Pictures? Lila's voice went up an octave. Of the ring, of the proposal. Someone must have taken pictures. Lila and Ethan looked at each other in panic. There were no pictures because there had been no romantic proposal, just a drunken bet that had spiraled out of control. Actually, Ethan said, we were so caught up in the moment that we forgot about pictures, and the ring was just temporary. We're looking for something more permanent. Well, that's what engagement parties are for, Zoe said. Speaking of which, your mom called my mom, and they're planning something for next weekend. Just family and close friends. But they want to make it official. After Zoe hung up, Lila and Ethan sat in stunned silence. An engagement party, Lila said finally, with both families and all our friends, where we'll have to act like a couple in love for an entire evening, Ethan added, in front of people who've known us for years and watched us argue about everything from thermodynamics to the proper way to organize lab equipment. This is bad. This is very bad. They were still sitting on the kitchen floor. But the comfortable intimacy of moments before had been replaced by the stark reality of their situation. Lila suddenly felt the weight of all the lies they'd been telling, all the people they'd been deceiving. Ethan, she said quietly, what are we doing? What do you mean? This. All of this. We're lying to everyone we care about. Your parents think I'm the love of your life. My mother is probably already planning our wedding. Zoe's going to want to be a bridesmaid. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. A gesture Lila had learned meant he was stressed. I know it's complicated. Complicated? Ethan, we're living a lie. A big, elaborate lie that gets bigger every day. But is it really a lie? Ethan asked suddenly. Lila felt her heart stop. What? I mean, we are living together. We do know each other's habits and quirks. We've met each other's families. Ethan paused, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. We care about each other. Care about each other as friends, Lila said quickly. Do we? Ethan's voice was soft. Lila, when you fell asleep on my shoulder last week, that wasn't for show. No one was watching. When I made you soup last Tuesday because you had a headache, that wasn't part of our arrangement. And when we kissed in front of Zoe, Lila interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. That was for show. Was it? Because it didn't feel like it was for show. Lila's chest felt tight. This was the conversation she'd been dreading, the one that could destroy the careful balance they'd established. Ethan, we can't do this, she said, scrambling to her feet. We can't start thinking this is real. Why not? Ethan stood too, moving closer to her. Lila, what if it could be real? Because it's not. Lila backed away from him, her voice rising. It's a contract, Ethan. A stupid, drunken mistake that we're stuck with for 6 months. And then what? What happens when the 6 months are up and we realize we've been fooling ourselves? What if we haven't been fooling ourselves? What if this is the best thing that's ever happened to both of us? Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that she'd start wanting something that was never supposed to be real. You don't mean that, she said. You're just caught up in the performance. We both are. Lila, no. Lila shook her head firmly. We need to stick to the plan. 6 months, no complications, and then we go back to our normal lives. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Right, he said finally. The plan. The rest of the day passed in uncomfortable silence. Ethan finished fixing the garbage disposal and then disappeared into his room to study. Lila tried to focus on her homework but kept replaying their conversation, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. That evening, they maintained their usual routine with mechanical precision. Ethan made dinner. Lila washed dishes. They studied at the kitchen table without making eye contact. When Lila said goodnight and headed upstairs, Ethan just nodded without looking up from his textbook. It was the first night since moving in together that Lila went to bed feeling lonely in her own house. The next morning, Lila woke to the sound of voices downstairs. She checked the clock. 7:30 a.m., which was early for visitors. She pulled on a robe and headed downstairs to find Ethan in the kitchen with Ava, both of them drinking coffee and speaking in low voices. Lila. Ava's face lit up when she saw her. Perfect timing. I was just telling Ethan about my brilliant idea for your engagement party. Lila forced a smile. Oh? So, you know how you two met through chemistry, right? I thought it would be adorable to have a chemistry-themed party. We could do molecular gastronomy for the food, use beakers and test tubes for drinks, maybe even set up some safe chemical demonstrations. Lila looked at Ethan, who was studying his coffee cup like it contained the secrets of the universe. That sounds elaborate, Lila said carefully. I know someone who does event planning with scientific themes. Ava continued enthusiastically. She did this amazing periodic table seating chart for a professor's retirement party. We could do something similar for your engagement. Ava, Ethan said quietly. That's really thoughtful. But what? Don't you think Lila would love it? It's perfect for both of you. Lila felt a stab of guilt at Ava's excitement. Ethan's sister was genuinely happy for them, planning an elaborate party to celebrate a relationship that didn't exist. "It's a wonderful idea," Lila said, because what else could she say? "Very thoughtful. Great. I'll call the planner today. This is going to be the best engagement party ever." After Ava left, Lila and Ethan continued their silent treatment from the day before, but now the silence felt different, heavier, filled with things they weren't saying. The breaking point came that afternoon. Lila was in her room trying to study when she heard a crash from downstairs, followed by Ethan swearing creatively. She found him in the kitchen, standing in the middle of what appeared to be the remains of a glass mixing bowl, his hand bleeding. What happened? Lila rushed to him without thinking, her earlier resolution to maintain distance forgotten. "I was trying to make bread," Ethan said, looking embarrassed. The bowl slipped. Lila guided him to the sink, turning on the water to rinse the cut on his palm. It was deeper than she'd expected, and blood kept welling up despite the cold water. "This needs stitches," she said, examining the wound. "We should go to the emergency room." "It's fine. I can handle it." "Ethan, you're bleeding all over my kitchen." "It's not fine. I'm a paramedic, Lila. I know how to treat a cut. You're also right-handed. And this is your right hand. How exactly are you planning to stitch yourself up?" Ethan looked down at his hand, clearly realizing the logistics problem. "I could call Ava," he said. "She's got medical training. Ava's an hour away. And you're bleeding now." Lila grabbed a clean towel and pressed it firmly against the cut. "I'm driving you to the hospital." "Lila, no arguments. We're going." 45 minutes later, they were sitting in an emergency room examination room while a nurse finished stitching Ethan's hand. Lila had held his other hand throughout the procedure, a fact that she was trying very hard not to think about. "You'll need to keep this dry for a week," the nurse was saying, "and come back if you notice any signs of infection." "Thank you," Ethan said, flexing his fingers gingerly. "You're lucky your girlfriend was there to bring you in," the nurse continued. "Head wounds and hand wounds always bleed more than they look like they should." After the nurse left, Lila and Ethan sat in the examination room, the awkwardness of the morning forgotten in the wake of the medical crisis. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. "For what?" "For taking care of me. For not letting me try to stitch my own hand." Lila shrugged. "You would have done the same for me." "Yeah, I would have." They looked at each other for a moment, and Lila felt that familiar pull, the one that made her want to close the distance between them and forget all about their conversation the day before. "Lila," Ethan said, his voice serious, "about yesterday." "Ethan." "Don't. I need to say this." Ethan shifted on the examination table to face her fully. "You're right. We agreed to 6 months. No complications, and I've been making it complicated." Lila felt something sink in her chest. "Okay, so, I think we should go back to the original plan. Roommates who are really good at pretending to be engaged. Nothing more." Lila nodded, telling herself this was what she wanted. "Right. The original plan. And after the 6 months are up, we can go back to being academic rivals who occasionally argue about lab safety." "Perfect," Lila said, the word tasting like ashes in her mouth. They drove home in silence, both of them pretending that Ethan's injured hand was the only thing that had been broken that day. That evening, Lila found herself standing in her backyard, looking at the spot where Ethan's experiment had exploded and started this whole mess. The crater had been filled in, and the grass was starting to grow back. But you could still see the outline of the damage if you knew where to look. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Ethan come outside until he spoke. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Lila turned to find him standing on the deck, his bandaged hand resting on the railing. "Just thinking about how different everything was 3 weeks ago," she said. "Simpler? Definitely simpler." Lila sat down on the steps leading to the deck. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't made that bet? If we just kept being rivals?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Lila thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I think we would have kept circling each other for the rest of college," he said, "arguing and competing and never quite figuring out why we couldn't just ignore each other. And now? Now we know." Lila looked up at him. "Know what?" Ethan met her eyes. And for a moment, Lila saw something raw and honest in his expression. "We know that underneath all the arguing and competition, we actually like each other," he said simply. Lila felt her chest tighten. "Ethan, I know. Original plan. No complications." Ethan sat down on the step beside her, careful to maintain some distance. "But we can still be friends, right? After all this is over." Lila looked at his profile in the fading light, memorizing the slope of his nose and the way his hair fell across his forehead. "Yeah," she said softly. "We can still be friends." It was a lie, and they both knew it, because Lila was beginning to realize that being Ethan's friend was going to be about as possible as being just a little bit in love with him, which was to say, completely impossible, but she had 3 months left to figure out how to make it possible, 3 months to prepare herself for the moment when they would sign the papers, dissolving their fake engagement, and go back to their separate lives, 3 months to learn how to stop loving someone she was never supposed to love in the first place. As they sat together in the growing darkness, Lila couldn't help but think that 3 months wasn't nearly enough time, but it was all they had. The engagement party was supposed to be the grand finale of their elaborate charade. But as Lila stood in front of her bedroom mirror 3 hours before the event, adjusting her dress for the 15th time, it felt more like preparing for her own execution. 2 weeks had passed since their agreement to return to the original plan, and those 2 weeks had been the most torturous of Lila's life. She and Ethan had become polite strangers, sharing the same space. Carefully choreographed to avoid any moment that might be construed as intimate, they said please and thank you for everything. They discussed household logistics with the efficiency of business partners. They maintained exactly 18 inches of distance when sitting on the couch for their evening study sessions. It was driving Lila absolutely insane. The worst part was how good Ethan had become at pretending nothing had changed. He still made coffee every morning, but now he left hers on the counter instead of handing it to her directly. He still helped with dinner, but they moved around the kitchen like dancers who had practiced never touching. He still left chemistry jokes on sticky notes around the house, but now they felt like messages from a friendly acquaintance rather than intimate communications between two people who knew each other's secrets. Lila had never realized how much she'd treasured those small moments of connection until they were gone. The dress she'd chosen for tonight was a deep blue number that Zoe had insisted brought out her eyes. Lila had bought it specifically for this party, telling herself it was just part of the performance. But standing here now, she knew the truth. She'd bought it because she wanted Ethan to see her in it. She wanted him to look at her the way he had that morning in the kitchen, like she was the most fascinating thing in the room, which was ridiculous because they'd agreed to be just roommates putting on a show. A knock on her bedroom door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Lila, are you ready? People are starting to arrive." Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. "Almost," Lila called back. Taking one last look in the mirror, the woman looking back at her seemed confident and poised, which was impressive considering Lila felt like she was held together with safety pins and sheer determination. When Lila opened her bedroom door, Ethan was standing in the hallway, wearing a dark gray suit that fit him perfectly and made his green eyes look almost emerald. His hair was styled differently than usual, swept back in a way that emphasized the strong line of his jaw. He looked devastating. "You look," Ethan started, then stopped, seeming to remember their new boundaries. "You look very nice." "Thank you." Lila replied politely, "You clean up well yourself." They stood there for a moment, an ocean of unspoken words between them, before Ethan cleared his throat. "We should probably go over our story one more time," he said. "Make sure we're consistent." Right. The story. Lila had practically memorized their fabricated romance by now. Secret study sessions that turned into dates. First kiss in the chemistry lab during finals week. "You proposed with a copper wire ring that we're replacing with something more traditional. And we're planning a spring wedding," Ethan added. "Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Because we're both focused on finishing our degrees first." "Perfect. We should probably." Ethan gestured toward the stairs. "Right. Showtime." Lila's house had been transformed. Ava's event planner friend had outdone herself, turning the living room and kitchen into something that looked like a sophisticated chemistry lab crossed with a romantic garden party. String lights hung from the ceiling like molecular structures. The dining table was set with beakers and test tubes, repurposed as vases filled with white roses and greenery. A periodic table seating chart directed guests to tables named after different chemical elements. The effect was whimsical and elegant, and Lila felt a stab of guilt that something so beautiful had been created to celebrate something so fake. Lila, Ethan, Sophia Martinez appeared beside them, radiant in a deep purple dress. "Everything looks perfect. Ava, this planner of yours is a genius." Ava beamed from her position near the molecular structure centerpiece. "I told you she was amazing. Wait until you see the cocktails. They change color when you add the garnish." Lila watched Ethan smile and nod at the appropriate moments, playing his part perfectly. To anyone watching, He looked like a man delighted to be celebrating his engagement, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Mija, Mijo. Michael Carter appeared with Linda right behind him. This is incredible. It's like being inside a chemistry textbook, but elegant. The attention to detail is remarkable, Linda added, examining a centerpiece that appeared to be a model of a water molecule. Ethan, you should take pictures to show your professor. This would be perfect for that chemistry outreach program you mentioned. More guests began arriving in waves. Zoe showed up with her newest boyfriend, a sweet art student named Lucas, who looked slightly overwhelmed by the scientific decor. Dr. Lee arrived with several other chemistry department faculty members, all of whom seemed delighted by the theme. Lila's extended family filled the remaining space, her aunts and cousins chattering excitedly about the wedding plans that didn't exist. As the evening progressed, Lila found herself watching Ethan work the room. He remembered everyone's names, asked thoughtful questions about their lives, and somehow made each person feel like they were the most important guest at the party. When Dr. Lee mentioned her research into sustainable chemical processes, Ethan engaged her in a detailed discussion that made the professor's face light up. When Lila's teenage cousin Isabella shyly asked about his firefighter work, Ethan spent 20 minutes patiently answering her questions about emergency medicine. He was, Lila realized with a pang, exactly the kind of man she would want to bring home to her family. Kind, intelligent, genuinely interested in other people, and capable of holding his own in any conversation. If their relationship were real, she would be proud to call him her fiancé. The thought made her chest ache. Lila, sweetheart. Lila's Aunt Clara appeared at her elbow. When are you and Ethan going to give us a speech? Everyone's dying to hear the story of how you two fell in love. Lila's blood ran cold. They hadn't prepared a speech. In all their planning and preparation, neither of them had considered that people might expect them to address their guests. Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Lila started. Nonsense. Ava had overheard and was already moving toward the makeshift sound system. A speech is perfect. Everyone wants to hear about your romance. Within minutes, Lila found herself standing in the middle of her living room with Ethan beside her. Surrounded by expectant faces, someone had handed Ethan a microphone, and he was looking at it like it might explode. Ethan began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Thank you all for being here tonight. Lila and I are so grateful to have all of you in our lives. Lila could hear the slight tremor in his voice. The only sign that he was as nervous as she was. You know, Ethan continued, finding his rhythm. When I first met Lila, I thought she was the most frustrating person I'd ever encountered. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. She had an opinion about everything. She was always right. And she had this annoying habit of making me question everything I thought I knew about chemistry. Ethan's eyes found Lila's, but somewhere along the way, I realized that being challenged by Lila wasn't frustrating, it was exhilarating. She made me want to be better at chemistry, better at understanding the world, better at being human. The room had gone completely quiet, everyone hanging on Ethan's words. People always talk about chemistry and relationships, Ethan continued, a slight smile playing at his lips. But with Lila, it's not just chemistry, it's nuclear fusion. She doesn't just complete me, she transforms me into something I never knew I could be. Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. This wasn't part of their script. This was Ethan speaking from the heart. And every word was hitting her like a physical blow. Ethan handed her the microphone, and Lila realized everyone was expecting her to respond. She looked out at the sea of faces, her family, his family, their friends, their professors, all waiting to hear her declaration of love for the man standing beside her. The man she actually did love, even though she wasn't supposed to. When Ethan and I first started this, Lila began, then stopped. She couldn't say this arrangement, or this charade, but what could she say? When Ethan and I first started this journey together, she continued, finding her footing. I thought I had everything figured out. I knew exactly what I wanted from life, exactly how to get there, and exactly what kind of person I was supposed to be. Lila looked at Ethan, who was watching her with an intensity that made her feel like they were the only two people in the room. But Ethan had other plans, she said, earning another laugh from their audience. He challenged every assumption I had about myself. He made me realize that being right isn't as important as being open to being wrong. He showed me that the best discoveries come from the most unexpected reactions. Lila paused, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Ethan asked me earlier today if I ever wondered what would have happened if we hadn't made that bet in the chemistry lab, she said. ignoring Ethan's sharp intake of breath. "And the truth is, I think we would have kept circling each other forever, too scared to find out what might happen if we stopped fighting long enough to see what we could build together." The room was so quiet, Lila could hear the sound system humming. "So, thank you," Lila continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "for making that bet with me, for being brave enough to find out what our chemistry could create." Lila handed the microphone back to Ethan, her hands shaking. The room erupted in applause and cheers, people wiping their eyes and calling out congratulations, but Lila barely heard any of it because Ethan was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. "Lila," he said quietly, leaning close so only she could hear him over the noise. "We need to talk." Before Lila could respond, they were surrounded by guests wanting to congratulate them, share their own love stories, and ask about wedding plans. Lila found herself swept into conversation after conversation, always aware of Ethan's presence nearby, but unable to get close enough to continue their interrupted conversation. The evening continued in a blur of toasts, dancing, and more stories about their perfect romance. Lila played her part, smiling and laughing and accepting congratulations, but part of her mind was replaying her speech over and over, wondering if she'd revealed too much. It wasn't until the last guest had left and they were alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of the party, that Lila and Ethan finally had a chance to talk. "That was," Ethan began, then stopped, running his hands through his hair and messing up his careful styling. "A disaster?" Lila suggested, starting to gather empty glasses. "I was going to say honest." Lila froze, a champagne flute halfway to the sink. "What? Your speech?" It was honest. Ethan moved closer to her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Lila, did you mean what you said about wondering what we could build together?" Lila set down the glass carefully, her hands shaking. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Ethan, we agreed." "Forget what we agreed," Ethan interrupted. "I'm asking what you meant." Lila looked at him, really looked at him, and saw her own confusion and hope reflected in his eyes. "I meant," she said slowly, "that somewhere in the middle of all this pretending, I stopped pretending." Ethan's breath caught. "Lila, I know it's not part of the plan." Lila rushed on. "I know we said 6 months and then back to normal. But Ethan, this doesn't feel normal anymore. It feels real." "Real," Ethan finished. "Real?" Lila agreed. They stared at each other for a moment that stretched into eternity, both of them afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell that had finally allowed them to tell the truth. "So, what do we do now?" Lila whispered. Instead of answering with words, Ethan stepped closer and cupped her face in his hands, the same way he had when they'd kissed for Zoe weeks ago. But this time, there was no audience. This time, it was just them. "We find out what our chemistry can create," Ethan said, echoing her words from the speech, and then he kissed her. This kiss was nothing like their performance for Zoe. This kiss was soft and desperate and full of weeks of suppressed feelings. Lila melted into it, her hands fisting in Ethan's shirt, pulling him closer. She could taste champagne on his lips and smell the lingering scent of his cologne, and everything about it felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you fell asleep on my shoulder," he admitted. "Just since then?" Lila asked, surprised by her own boldness. Ethan laughed, a sound full of relief and joy. "Okay, since the morning you came downstairs wearing my t-shirt and looking like you belonged in my life." "I did belong in your life," Lila said. "I do belong in your life. Even after the 6 months are up." Lila smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks, especially after the 6 months are up. Ethan spun her around, lifting her off her feet, both of them laughing like teenagers who had just discovered they had crushes on each other. "So," Ethan said when he set her down, "what do we tell people?" "That our fake engagement turned into a real one." "We tell them the truth," Lila said, "that sometimes the best reactions happen when you're not expecting them, and that the most stable compounds are formed under pressure." "Exactly." Lila stood on her tiptoes to kiss him again, brief and sweet, "though we should probably keep the part about the tequila and the bet to ourselves." "Agreed. Some chemistry is too dangerous for public consumption." As they stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their engagement party, Lila realized that their fake relationship had taught her something real. That the best kind of love wasn't the kind that made sense on paper, but the kind that surprised you with its unexpected reactions. "Ethan," she said as they started cleaning up together, moving around each other with the familiar choreography they'd developed over the past month. Yeah? What do you think would have happened if your experiment hadn't exploded that morning? Ethan considered this. Stacking plates with careful precision, I think we would have found some other way to end up here. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe it would have been messier. But I think we would have figured it out eventually. Why? Ethan stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. Because some reactions are inevitable, Lila, you can try to prevent them. You can control the conditions. You can even try to avoid them entirely. But when you have the right elements in the right proportions, the reaction is going to happen no matter what. Lila felt her heart swell with affection for this man who spoke about love in terms of chemical equations and made it sound like poetry. Is that your scientific opinion, Dr. Carter? That's my scientific observation, Dr. Martinez. As they finished cleaning and headed upstairs together, not to separate rooms, Lila reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. 6 weeks ago, she would have said that marrying Ethan Carter was the worst thing that could possibly happen to her. Now, she couldn't imagine her life without him in it. Lila, Ethan said as they reached the top of the stairs. Yeah? Tomorrow when we wake up, this is still going to be real, right? This isn't just some reaction that's going to burn out overnight. Lila looked at this man who had become her partner in crime, her intellectual equal, her closest friend, and now, somehow, the love of her life. Ethan Carter, she said, echoing the words from her speech. What we have isn't just chemistry, it's nuclear fusion. That kind of reaction doesn't burn out. It powers stars. Ethan's smile was so bright, it could have powered a few stars itself. In that case, he said, taking her hand and leading her toward what had been his room and was now going to be their room, I think we're going to have a very bright future. As Lila followed Ethan into their bedroom, she couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. She'd started this mess by making a drunken bet with the man she thought she hated. She was ending it by falling in love with her best friend. If that wasn't chemistry, she didn't know what was. Epilogue. 6 months later, Lila Martinez Carter, she'd decided to hyphenate, stood in the same chemistry lab where this whole adventure had begun, to watching Ethan demonstrate proper lab safety techniques, to a group of fascinated high school students. The key to any successful experiment, Ethan was saying, is preparation, observation, and knowing when to trust your partner. He caught Lila's eye and winked, making her heart do the same little flip it had been doing for months now. They'd gotten married 3 weeks after their engagement party in a small ceremony in Lila's backyard, right over the spot where Ethan's first experiment had exploded. Sophia had cried through the entire ceremony. Linda had taken approximately 300 photos. Ava had given a maid of honor speech that included a detailed analysis of their chemical compatibility. And Michael had walked Lila down the aisle when her own father couldn't a gesture that had reduced everyone to tears. The best part, though, had been the moment when the officiant asked if they took each other as husband and wife, and Lila and Ethan had answered in unison. The reaction is inevitable. Now, 6 months later, they were finishing their final semester of undergraduate work and preparing for graduate school at the same university, in the same program, because some partnerships were too good to separate. Mrs. Martinez Carter, one of the high school students, raised her hand. Is it true that you and Mr. Carter met because of a chemistry accident? Lila exchanged a look with Ethan, both of them trying not to laugh. Not exactly, Lila said diplomatically. We met because we were both very passionate about chemistry. Sometimes passion can lead to unexpected reactions. But the explosion in your backyard really happened, right? Another student asked. My sister goes to college here, and she heard about it. The explosion really happened, Ethan confirmed, and it taught us both an important lesson about lab safety and the importance of having a good partner to help you clean up your messes. After the students left, Lila and Ethan were alone in the lab where everything had started. Do you ever miss it? Ethan asked, settling beside Lila on one of the lab stools. The arguing, the competition, the constant need to prove who was smarter. Lila considered this. Sometimes, but I think we've just redirected that energy into more productive activities, like co-authoring research papers and planning experiments together instead of trying to sabotage each other's work, Ethan added, and the occasional heated debate about proper lab technique that ends with us making out against the fume hood, especially that. Lila laughed and pulled Ethan closer, spinning her around on the stool until she was facing him. Lila Martinez Carter, Ethan said. Carter Martinez. Lila corrected. Carter Martinez, Ethan amended with a grin. I have a question for you. Oh no. The last time you had a question for me in this lab, we ended up accidentally getting married. This time I'm completely sober, and I've thought this through very carefully." Lila raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Ethan took her hands, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past months. "Do you want to spend the rest of our lives conducting experiments together? The kind that might explode, the kind that might fail spectacularly, and the kind that might just change the world." Lila felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest, the one that happened every time Ethan reminded her why she'd fallen in love with him. "Ethan Carter," she said. "I thought you'd never ask. Is that a yes?" "That's a—" "The reaction is inevitable," Lila said, standing up to kiss her husband, "and I can't wait to see what we discover next." As they kissed in the same lab where they'd first made their ridiculous bet, Lila reflected on the strange alchemy that had brought them together. She'd learned that the best reactions weren't always the ones you planned. Sometimes they were the ones that surprised you, challenged you, and changed everything you thought you knew about chemistry. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they lasted a lifetime.